The rest of the story. It is called Route 23 today, but half a hundred years ago they called it Seven Hills Road. That's because the road connecting Concordia and Alma, Missouri, passed through the 7 hills that lay between the two towns. The farmers in the area gave directions according to those hills, and it was just over the second one, north of Concordia, that a farm boy named Julius Brandt was born and grew up. A lot of memories associated with his teenage years on the family farm, but one in particular of the time that a stranger from the city ran his brand-new Chrysler touring car into a culvert alongside 7 Hills Road. That was February 1930. The fellow showed up on the Brandt's doorstep, politely explained what had happened. A farmer down the road, Arthur Furking, had seen the whole thing and then had brought his span of mules to help extricate the car. But unfortunately, they had just oiled the road and the mules couldn't get a footing. The stranger was a long, dark drive from home. Could Julius help him? Well, sir, the teenager went out and fired up his dad's old steel-wheeled Fortune tractor, and he chugged out to where the Chrysler was stuck, and they threw a chain on the car, and they started pulling, and in no time, the trusty tractor had done its work. The stranger, grinning big, said, "Here, son, I want you to have this." Julius could hardly believe his eyes. It was a $5 bill. And that, in those days, was quite a gratuity. And the city fellow got in his car and drove away. But this is the rest of the story. It was only a few weeks later. In the middle of a stormy spring night, there came a knock at the Brandt's farmhouse door. Now, wait a minute. It was the same stranger. Young Julius looked at the clock. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. That's right, the man was stuck again. Same car, same road. Only it was a real emergency this time. The Chrysler was in a roadside creek, and the creek was swelling fast with the rain. The stranger apologized for such an intrusion at such an hour, but Julius assured him it was all right. He'd crank up the old tractor again, pull the car up onto the road again, and he did. And again the city fellow gave Julius $5 for his trouble and was quickly on his way. As it turned out, the stranger had been visiting a hunting lodge north of Blackburn, had regularly met with friends there for a round of drinks and a game of poker. He simply found it difficult negotiating 7 Hills Road after an evening out with the boys. But the Brandt family never forgot what a nice fellow he seemed to be and how generous he was with young Julius, and they were especially impressed when they learned just who the bespectacled stranger was from a picture of him in a Kansas City newspaper. He was a judge. In fact, he was the presiding judge of the Jackson County Court. For decades, school children reading about him and his deeds have had the impression of a human powerhouse, a feisty, determined, utterly self-sufficient individualist who, for the sake of his nation, unhesitatingly plunged her enemies into an unprecedented nuclear nightmare. But from this moment on, among your own mental snapshots of him will be that of a flustered motorist with his eyeglasses fogging up and the rain cascading off his hat and his car in a flooded creek. Just an average sort of fellow who could not seem to keep his car on the road. A pleasant and generous stranger named Harry Truman. Because now you know the rest of the story.
What are the odds of having a car wreck twice in the same spot? Do you remember the classic joke, "Do you know Bill down the street heard that most accidents happen within 5 miles of home, so he moved"? It's an oldie but a goodie. You know, for nearly 100 years, there's been a battle of the automobile brands. Some people are Ford men, some are Chevy men. It seems that since the beginning of the automobile age, there's been an ongoing battle between Ford and Chevrolet fans. Are you a Ford person or a Chevrolet person? Or perhaps a different car brand altogether? What about an Oldsmobile person? Do you remember this from the holiday classic, A Christmas Story?
That hot damn Olds is froze up again.
Some men are Baptists, others Catholics. My father was an Oldsmobile man.
Would freeze up in the middle of summer on the equator.
Well, it turns out that Harry Truman was a Chrysler man. Mr. Harvey mentioned in the rest of the story that Truman was driving his brand new Chrysler touring car in February 1930 when he hit that culvert. On November 9, 1940, while serving as U.S. Senator from Missouri, Truman traded in two cars, a 1940 Chrysler sedan and a 38 Dodge sedan, and purchased a 1941 Chrysler Royal Club Coupe and a 1941 Chrysler Windsor four-door sedan. For an extra $92 each, Truman had the car dealership, Lon's Car Exchange, install heaters and radios in both cars. $92. Truman became vice president on January 20th, 1945, and president of the United States upon the death of Franklin Roosevelt on April the 12th of that same year. He served 2 terms until his presidency ended in January 1953 when Dwight Eisenhower became president. When his presidency ended, Truman purchased a 1953 Chrysler. In this 1953 Chrysler, he drove his wife Bess back to their home in Independence, Missouri. You see, former presidents were not given Secret Service protection until the mid-1960s. Truman then purchased a 1955 Chrysler New Yorker. This car, Truman's personal daily driver, came up for sale recently. Car and Driver magazine listed the car in restored but non-running condition for $83,500. The listing stated, "The presidential offering has a lot going for it, including the fact that it's been fully restored inside and out. Other pros include the restored 331 cubic inch Hemi V8 engine and a 2-speed Power Flight automatic transmission that powers the rear wheels." Well, it did anyway. The one con about this car is that it does not run. That's a lot of money for a non-running car. I wonder if they take a check. The next car we know Truman owned was a 1969 model, which he traded in 1972 for this, you guessed it, another Chrysler. This time it was a Chrysler Newport. It was the last car he ever purchased. Harry S. Truman died on December 26, 1972, after a stubborn fight for life. That was a direct quote from the WhiteHouse.gov. Bess Truman used the car until her death in 1982. In those 10 years that the Trumans owned this car, they only put 19,000 miles on it. It remains and is occasionally on display at the Truman House in Independence, Missouri. I must point out that just 4 blocks west of the Truman home is a street called North Chrysler Avenue. No H in Chrysler in this street name. Was there something in Truman's subconscious that steered him toward Chrysler vehicles, or was this just merely a coincidence? I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and as Paul Harvey would say, good day.